Welcome to episode 18 of the Resurrection podcast. I am Acusio Bivona. I want you to place yourself in a specific environment tonight. It's 11 p.m. You're standing in your garage, or maybe you're sitting in the dark of your home office. The glow of your monitor is casting a shadow against the wall. You're carrying a massive, undeclared liability. Maybe the Q3 revenue is completely stalling, and the cash flow is drying up. Maybe your marriage is devolved into a silent logistical partnership and you're sleeping in the guest room. Maybe you just got the blood panels back from your physician and the metabolic markers are terrifying. Whatever the specific nature of the lag in your system, you've made a definitive, silent decision. You're going to handle it alone. You're going to go dark. You're going to put your head down, isolate the variable, and work the problem in complete silence until you solve it. You will not tell your executive team. You will certainly not tell your wife. And you will not reach out to your peers. And you tell yourself that this is what a leader does. You tell yourself that silence is strength. You tell yourself that the lone operator is the most lethal force in the room. But society has sold you a cinematic illusion. We see it in the media. You hear it in the boardrooms, and you've adopted it into your own operating system. The stoic, isolated man who needs absolutely no external input to navigate extreme friction. But we need to strip away the cinematic illusion and look at the clinical data. In nature, do you know what a lone wolf actually is? It's a dead wolf. In the biological reality of an apex predator, a wolf that is separated from the pack doesn't become a superhero. It loses its co-regulatory infrastructure. It loses its tactical redundancy. It gets cornered, it starves, and it dies. And right now, if you're attempting to isolate your way out of a massive system lag, you're not being a stoic operator. You're being reckless with your biological infrastructure. So we need to examine the physics of isolation. Why do highly successful men who manage hundreds of employees and scale massive logistics, lock the doors and isolate the exact moment their own internal systems go dormant? It's a defense mechanism built entirely on executive ego. When you hit a point of severe friction, you experience shame. You don't want anyone to see that the architect of the company has lost control of his own machine. So you initiate a system lockdown, and you retreat into your own head. But here's the structural flaw of your head. It's a closed loop system. When you isolate, your prefrontal cortex, which is the software responsible for objective logic, strategic planning, and composed decision making, begins to degrade. Without external data inputs to challenge your internal narratives, your head becomes an echo chamber. And let's look at exactly what is happening to your hardware when you do this. Humans are biologically wired for a process called co-regulation. Your autonomic nervous system uses the presence of safe, composed peers to regulate its own threat detection algorithms. When you're embedded in a high-caliber network, your vagus nerve sends continuous data streams to your brain that the environment is secure. Your baseline cortisol drops. Your cognitive bandwidth expands. And you operate with presence. When you isolate, you deliberately sever the co-regulatory network. Your amygdala perceives this isolation not as focus, but as an absolute biological threat. It assumes you've been exiled from the safety of the perimeter. And within 72 hours of professional friction combined with isolation, your sympathetic nervous system locks into the on position. You're flooded with catabolic hormones. You're trying to solve a complex marital issue or a multi-million-dollar cash flow problem while your biological infrastructure is actively preparing for physical combat. And look at the physical metrics of this isolation. Your sleep architecture immediately degrades. You stop accessing the deep, slow-wave restorative sleep necessary to clear amyloid plaque from your brain. You wake up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, flooded with adrenaline. The chronic cortisol forces your endocrine system to store visceral fat aggressively around your organs, suffocating your vital systems. You may think you're focusing, but your body thinks it's dying. In a closed loop system, your own bad ideas start to sound like brilliant strategies. In isolation, the idea to liquidate your retirement to cover a bad business bet sounds logical. The idea to freeze your wife out and give her the silent treatment until she complies sounds like leadership. There's no external system to run a diagnostic on your degraded code. There's no one there to look you in the eye and say, that is a fucking mistake. Recalibrate. The lone operator doesn't win. He just drowns quietly. You see this operational error play out across very specific archetypes. High-earning men deploy isolation in different ways, but the system lag always leads to the same outcome. Let's look at the first archetype. I call him the public titan. This is the founder or the CEO who just landed a massive editorial feature. Maybe he was just profiled in a major business magazine, or celebrated for his bold entrepreneurial story and his rapid market expansion. On LinkedIn, he's an absolute monument of success. He projects absolute dominance. He speaks on panels. He advises startups. But his internal ledger is completely bankrupt behind closed doors. Because his entire identity is tethered to a public validation, he can't afford to let the market know that his physical hardware is dormant. Excuse me. He can't let his investors know that his marriage is a silent, empty room. So the public titan isolates emotionally. He surrounds himself with employees, vendors, and fans, people who need his money or his influence, but he has absolutely zero peers. He has no redundant systems. He's surrounded by people, yet completely alone in his own infrastructure. When the friction inevitably hits his personal life, he has no protocol to process it. He just buys a more expensive watch, secures a nicer zip code, and hopes the external metrics will finally reactivate his internal presence. But they never do. Then you have the silent provider. This is the VP or senior director, 45 years old, earning $400,000 a year. He pays the mortgage on the sprawling house in the suburbs. He funds the private school tuition. He's the logistical pillar of his family. But right now, the division he runs is bleeding revenue, and his position is no longer secure. Or his blood panels just came back, and his physician told him his cardiovascular system is a ticking clock. Instead of executing a secure transfer of this data, he swallows it, goes dark. He walks into his house at 7 p.m., sits at the dinner table, and says absolutely nothing. He believes that by hiding the friction, he's shielding his wife and children from the stress. He thinks his silence is an act of noble sacrifice. It's not. It's an act of cowardice. His wife doesn't feel shielded. She feels the massive, suffocating distance. She feels him becoming a ghost. She senses the system lag, but because he refuses to provide the data, she assumes she's the problem. His isolation doesn't protect the family. It starves them of his leadership. Both of these men are running a corrupted operating system. They're prioritizing their ego over their own biological infrastructure. And they're actively choosing to remain offline. You can't resurrect a dormant system using the exact same isolated code that caused it to shut down. You can't re-architect a building from the inside while the foundation is sinking. You must open the loop. Let's look at the clinical data. When you isolate, your system doesn't just pause. It actively degrades. I look at this telemetry every single day. Whether I'm analyzing DEXA body composition scans with an executive in Culver City or sitting across from a founder during a tactical install in Seattle or Tampa, the biometric footprint of isolation is identical across the board. When a man goes dark, his physical hardware pays the tax. His visceral fat increases. His resting heart rate elevates. His cardiovascular elasticity drops. You can literally track a man's professional isolation by measuring the inflammatory markers in his blood panels. But the heaviest data I see isn't just in the coaching metrics. As a community ambassador for the Movember Foundation here in Los Angeles, I see the absolute terminal end of this isolation code. We organize the events, we raise the capital, we run the fundraisers and the golf tournaments. And the underlying mission is always to combat the exact same structural error. Men are going offline permanently because they refuse to open the loop. They believe that silence is an executive requirement. They believe that bearing the friction alone is what makes them formidable. It's a lethal error. If you look at the men who actually sustain their edge over decades, they don't operate in a vacuum. They've built an external infrastructure. They have a network that regulates their nervous system, challenges their internal narratives, and forces them to remain composed under fire. If you're standing in the dark, trying to outthink a massive system lag, you're not acting like a titan. You're acting like a liability. So, we're going to replace the code. You can't rebuild a dormant system with the same isolated logic that put it to sleep. We execute the redundancy protocol. This is a 30-day architectural timeline to bring your system back online. Please don't alter these steps. Days 1 to 3 is target acquisition. You must locate one peer, not a subordinate, not an employee, and absolutely not a drinking buddy who will just validate your complaints and pour you another scotch. You're looking for an operator, a man who functions at your caliber or ideally higher, a man whose own biological infrastructure and professional execution demand your respect. You don't need a committee. You need one solid load-bearing pillar. Days 4 through 10 is the secure transfer. You initiate contact. This isn't a confession. Don't treat this like a therapy session where you endlessly unpack your feelings. Treat it as a tactical briefing. You sit down with this peer, you look him in the eye, and you deliver the raw data. You state the exact nature of the lag. My Q3 revenue is down 40% and my cash flow is drying up. Or my marriage has devolved into a logistical partnership and I'm sleeping in the guest room. Or my resting heart rate is 85 and my physical hardware is dormant. You follow the data with the single most powerful command an executive can issue. My internal system is lagging and I'm flying blind. I need external eyes on my architecture. The absolute second you execute this transfer, your biology will shift. The physical pressure in your chest will drop because you're no longer fighting a phantom in the isolation of your own mind. You've brought the friction into the light where it can be measured, managed, and dismantled. And days 11 to 30 are the clinical counsel. You don't just dump the data and retreat back to the cave. You establish a recurring calibration check. A 15-minute phone call every Friday morning. A definitive metric of accountability. You build a redundant system so that your prefrontal cortex never has to operate in a closed loop again. Now, I know exactly what your ego is saying right now. I hear these objections from C-suite operators every single week, and they're entirely predictable. The first one is, I'm too busy managing the friction to talk about it. You're confusing motion with traction. You're spinning your engine at 8,000 RPMs in neutral. Staring at your monitor at 2 a.m. isn't strategy. It's panic disguised as a work ethic. You don't have the bandwidth to solve the problem because the isolation is consuming all of your cognitive energy. Open the loop, downregulate your nervous system, and you will solve in an hour what you've been staring at for a month. Another one I get is, my peers will use this against me in the market. If the men in your circle will weaponize your honesty to steal your market share, you don't have peers. You have competitors. You've built a network based entirely on transactional leverage, not character. That's a massive structural vulnerability. It means your shield wall is an illusion. You must actively source and install men of actual integrity into your perimeter. And the third one I get is, I must project absolute authority to my wife. I can't look like I'm losing control. In my opinion, this is the most dangerous lie of all. Your wife already knows your system is lagging. Women are highly attuned to the biological telemetry of their environment. She feels the distance. She feels the dormant energy. By refusing to declare the issue, you're forcing her to guess what is wrong, and she will inevitably assume that she is the problem. You don't project authority by hiding the fire. You project authority by calmly stating, we are taking on water in this specific area, and here's the protocol I am installing to re-architect the ship. That is how a composed man leads. You have to run a diagnostic on your own environment tonight. Are you operating in the dark? Are you sitting on a massive undeclared liability, trying to quietly outthink a fundamental system lag? Apex operators have redundant systems. They don't rely on a single point of failure. They don't isolate. If you look around your life and realize you've built a fortress that has become a prison, if every bridge has been burned because you refused to admit your hardware was going offline, and you are left standing in the silence of your own echo chamber, it's time to execute the secure transfer. Go to coachkuz.com and apply for the resurrection strategy call. I will be your red team. We will look at your battle plan. We will extract the toxic data, locate the structural holes in your logic, and build the exact protocol you need to reactivate the machine. The lone operator dies in the cold. The composed man builds a redundant system. Make the call. Rebuild the machine. Resurrect the man. I am Acusio Bivona, and I will see you in the work.